Welcome back to the Men of Change podcast, where we as men are learning to lead ourselves for the change that we want to see in ourselves and the change that we want to see in society. Thank you so much for tuning in. Once again, thank you so much, Arise Studio, Eob, and the team. I want to thank you guys for just making the platform happen for us. Continue to follow them also on YouTube, because the Arise Studios do have a platform here on YouTube. If you have been enjoying the first episode, remember, start off by subscribing, by making sure that you are following, and also that you comment and let us know what your questions are, because we will be answering some of those questions. We are doing the second part of identity with myself, Jabu Zwane, as your host, advocating for men's issues. On the last episode, we spoke quite intently about understanding your genetic disposition, understanding where you're coming from. We looked at identity from the point of philosophy, from the point of science, from the point of psychology, and even from a biblical perspective. And one of the key takeaways from that previous episode was the fact that take note of how in the olden days, when there were wars, whenever a nation took over another nation, they would change people's names, they would change their cultures, they would try to erase their history. And because it made it easier that way to dominate them and to also pass on their way of thinking. And it's something that we don't think about sometimes. Like one of the reasons why languages get changed is not so much only for conversation, but it's because every single language holds within itself a way of thinking, a consciousness. And language itself, words, program the way that we think. Different languages express things differently. Some will start with one word and some will end with another word. But we don't sometimes realize in mindset development is that that's part of the programming. If you think about it especially from the language of the computer, how you align those letters determine a completely different outcome altogether. And so it's crucial once again to understand, especially as men, what is the language of manhood? What is the language of masculinity? What is the language of being a man? When we're speaking about all of these stoicism, masculinity, we're speaking about strength, we're speaking about leadership, protecting, providing, competition, winning, all of that. That language programs a certain way as far as the identity of a man. And it's important for us to revisit that. But today, I want to talk about the identity of a man in continuing understanding where did it go wrong, and then how do we redefine for ourselves, and how do we build a new identity. A question was asked earlier on by the young men in the studio, and this was about, is it possible for us to change, to we continue with our old identity that is based on our history, or is it possible for us to change our identity? And that is the question that we're going to be exploring again even today. So, thank you. Let me go right into it, and I'm going to ask you guys to share some of the questions again that we did the last time. The first question is, how did men lose their identity? So I'm going to ask you guys, what are your thoughts? What do you think happened? Do you have any thoughts in terms of how men have lost their identity?
Yeah, my name is Yona. Thank you again. So, how men have lost their identity? I think it's because as men progressed isn't it from the past, as we were saying, we were identifying ourselves as maybe you come from a certain clan. Mm-hmm. Then now, as time progressed by, we started deviating from that, because as evolution happened of a man, mm-hmm. we started even mixing with other clans and other people from different backgrounds. So as men now started not knowing themselves, where do they come from? They started losing what binds them with their past, their history, their languages, and I think that what also deviated men in not knowing how to find themselves inside, and they started not knowing themselves, because I think as a person, as you start knowing where really you come from, I think that's when you can start searching who you really are inside of yourself.
Awesome. Awesome. We on that.
Okay. Hi, I'm Khalang. I think how did men lose or lost their identity? I think it's by adopting to habits that human being not you supposed to do, because there's this I usually get most a church, but if the sun sets on you and you are away from home, you even sleep next to the road, you become a hobo. And one thing, if you don't know who you are, other people will tell you who you are, and you're not gonna be told by the people who are people. I'm not sure if it's making sense when I'm saying it in English. So isisho kahle ngesiZulu ithi, if awuzazi ukuthi ungubani uzotshelwa ngabantu engengobantu ngobuntu bakho ukuthi ungubani. I think that's where we lost our identity, because people kept on telling us who we are and what to do. We keep on hearing, and they tell us everything you do, you have to do this, you are this. Yeah, but I think that's how we lost our identity, by hearing from outside people telling us what we are and who we are.
Awesome. Go for it.
I'll probably say the same thing. I was going to say something I think we were misled a little bit about what it means to be a man sometimes. This thing we referenced in the first episode, very so I'll just use it again, about where you're taught not to feel your emotions, not taught not to cry, and then you have the shortcut to anger, and then anger becomes a definition of masculinity, but that's an unhealthy definition of masculinity. And then you embody that because you think that's what you're supposed to be, and you neglect other aspects of who you are that gives you a depth of fulfillment. Even this thing, I think in our society a lot of time, being a man from past generations is often simply defined as what a woman is not. And this is where you get a lot of misogyny and things like this, such as we were talking what is a boy, and the difference between a boy and a man, and a boy would be someone that doesn't take care of their child and things like that, but a man would. But then you can also or someone, as you said in the beginning, asked you what was a man, and you were a man is someone that brings order. But then that's not necessarily something that a woman can't do. In my household, my father's great. He does bring order. But my mother as well is very confrontational, very confident, brings order in, the mundane ways, but also in philosophical ways in myself, teaching me who I am, teaching me confidence and things like that. So I think we've maybe put these wrong ideas of what it means to be a man, and maybe put too much emphasis on what it means to be a man, where obviously there's things about being a man, but I think it's also about being a person.
Yeah. Awesome. That's awesome. I mean, I like that. I like what you guys have shared about, of course, origin and not knowing who you are, and listening to other people. And then, of course, I love the whole idea of what the man is. A man is what a woman is not, as a very wrong premise. And I believe that to be so true, is that there's this whole idea of thinking that men and women are opposites, which is untrue. Yeah. Because if you look at the origin of what a man and a woman is, especially from a biblical perspective, it's, again, they're one. In fact, in the Bible, it says that God called them both Adam. It wasn't that Adam was a man and Eve was a woman, but that together, as they were called Adam together, they have a unit. And their different roles does not necessarily make it the opposite. In fact, the whole idea of man and woman, when God looked at Adam and said, listen, all the other animals, there's a male and a female, you are lonely. And I need to find someone that is going to complement you, and that together you will become this one unit, which basically tells us the following, that a big part of being a human being is that, especially if you're living with a woman, or with other people, so you got to find a way to be complementary to other people, to support other people, to be able to help them to realize their full humanity as they help you to realize your humanity. And that is actually the most important part of us, I believe, of being a man, is how do you become a complementary component of society. So let's look at it from some of the stuff that I prepared. And here's one of the thoughts that I have in my mind around where does it go wrong with the men's identity? And I think a big part of that is that throughout history, there's a traceable reality that there's a point where men started to misuse their manhood. They started to misuse the privileges that they had in society, the power that they had in society, where it became more a society where men would be served by women rather than actually being an exchange, a mutual exchange of servanthood. The original design of a man was not for a man to be a king and to lord over a woman, but it was actually for, when you look at it specifically, again, talking about from the biblical perspective, is that Adam was given this instruction: be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, and let it yield for you meat to eat. And the original design was that it is through the union of both Adam and Eve that the nations will be blessed. So there's a crucial part of a blessing there that had to happen. And so for me, when I look at it, even from the biological point of view, is that the moment that in history where men started to see themselves more as lords over women and women becoming subservient, there had to be a retaliation at some point. And the sad thing about another observable reality is the following. Domination has hierarchy. It's called hierarchy. And the moment that men started to misuse their power, and also that it moved from just dominating a woman, but also to start dominating each other. Down the line, you have different people, different men dominating and different men oppressing different men. And that's why in the end, the ultimate result of that is what we see, even with the whole idea of racism, of other people being superior to other ones, is that when we started through history excluding, especially in the consciousness of humanity, the voice of women, the safety of women, it left us literally to be in that basic state where literally we're animalistic in a lot of ways. And we know there's that period in history, of the bloody period in history, of wars, millions of people being killed by wars that have been led by men, the genocides that have been led by men, the atrocities that have been led by men. We spoke about that in terms of the Rwandese, and talking about the Holocaust. We're talking about the guys like Stalin. We're talking about what happened even here in Africa with the Leopolds. Like, all of these were men that were abusing their power to dominate societies and to dominate people. And I believe that this is one of the fundamental factors that began to distort the identity of a man, because it started to exalt strength above humility. Like, yes, it is. You can be strong and humble, and humility is that you have the right estimation of who you are as a person. Humility is that I'm not superior, I'm not inferior, but I have a great understanding of my value relative to everybody else, that I am who I am by grace that has been afforded to me. And everybody else is also who they are by the grace that has been afforded to me. And then I have to respect that. And that's part of why perhaps it was so easy for us to buy into the idea that men don't cry. Men have to show strength. Men have got to have everything together. That if a man doesn't have anything, then he's nothing. A man must be heavily resourced. If he has no resources and he has to ask for help, then he is, again, nothing. He's not respectable. And these ideas, I am afraid, they're not necessarily ideas that come from women. A lot of men are more concerned about getting respect from other men and not having to be seen as being weak in front of other men. So let's go back and let's go into it a little bit more. And explore this topic some more. Industrialization shifted men from being purpose-driven craft to profit-driven labor. And that's one of the changes that throughout industrialization, we can even see it in terms of the books that were written, that there was a point where profit became more important than purpose. That, for example, this industrialization was supposed to make it easier for us as humanity. Technology, advancement, infrastructure, all of those things that came with industrialization, it was supposed to benefit humanity by simplifying especially our limitations, because we are limited as human beings. We have limited strength, we have limited ability, we've got limited knowledge, we've got limited existence, we have limited time as far as our lifetime here on earth, limited understanding, limited awareness. Industrialization is supposed to help us, whether it be through cars, through housing, through road infrastructure. All of that was supposed to help humanity have an easier life. But unfortunately, profits took precedence, and the profits preferred over purpose. And I believe that's where the problem started. Manhood started to be defined by productivity and provision. Manhood started to be defined by productivity and provision. And it is not to say that as a man you should not be productive or you should not be able to provide. But if it becomes the sole definition of who you are, what happens when you are not in a position to do so? And we are seeing that crisis right now, not only in South Africa, but globally, where with the equalization of opportunity, where more and more women have as much opportunities in many industries as men, which basically means that those opportunities are lacking, where men are not able to get jobs, are not able to have businesses, are not as productive as other men, then they start to feel as though they're not men. And in fact, there are podcasts all over that are telling men, if you're not resourceful, if you're not productive, if you're not do this, and then you don't have this, earn this much money, you don't have all of these resources, then you are not a man. Unfortunately, that is still a premise that is based on industrialization, which was hijacked, unfortunately, by profitability and how much you are able to take advantage, how much you are able to take from other people rather than actually serving a particular purpose. And then wars and absent fathers left generations of men emotionally detached and traumatized, often returning home physically present but emotionally exiled. I experienced this. Many in this country have experienced this. Even apartheid, it wasn't just black people that experienced this. I had conversations with many white boys and children that grew up with fathers who were either who used to go and work and also who were in the army, that when they came home so spent that they were not emotionally available. And we have this as part of the problem. And unfortunately, the exploitation in that sense of where men were taken to go and do these wars and spend all of their emotional energy, physical energy, psychological energy, spiritual energy fighting these wars, or out there being so super productive. When they came home, they were not emotionally available. And I know one of the things that a lot of us men have learned is that part of being a man is that you should not then be emotionally available. That you only get called in, especially as a father, especially back in those days. I don't know if it still happens, but probably even today it does, where, have you ever heard this expression? You do something wrong as a kid and they'll say, wait until your father gets here. And when the father comes, then the father comes and executes the important job of disciplining you. And then unfortunately, what comes up with that is that a lot of men learned that to be a man in a home, a father, you don't get yourself involved in the mundane things. You only get involved in important things, important decisions only. So you don't bother yourself with things which are unimportant. And that's why, so then, as a result, so many of us men feel uncomfortable engaging in domestic work because that's unimportant. Taking the child to school, that's unimportant. Helping the child with homework, that's unimportant. Making the time to go out and go to the, to game park or to go spend time somewhere on a vacation, well, that's unimportant. And unfortunately, that has created then emotional exile. that so many of us men are present in the physical body, in our relationships, romantic relationships, in our families, even in our friendships, but emotionally we are not there. You know, our mind, there's a song that says, your body is here with me, but your mind is on the other side of town. You're messing me around. It was sung by a male to a female, but I think it actually applies more to men. And then modern culture. Modern culture reduces identity to image, performance, and possessions. Social media trains men to be liked and not to be liked, but not to be significant. And significance really has to do, again, with your impact and your contribution to society. And this is quite interesting. It's a recent study by Stanford. I think it was done in Stanford University. It was done like last year sometime, where they studied platforms like YouTube and TikTok. And they're saying this, that as soon as a man opens up an account on either of those platforms, within 15 minutes, the algorithm is going to feed them information that is antisocial, that is anti-women, that is macho, hyper macho at the extreme. There's certain individuals, like men like your Andrew Tate, and people that speak along those lines of that bravado as a way of showing your masculinity. And of course, the red pill content that is very much about men dominating women and being dominant in society, and not necessarily holding themselves accountable to be healthy members of society that negotiate fairly with other people around them, to share resources, to share the space, to share influence, and to be open to be convinced and to be persuaded that your idea, you must push your idea until your idea is taken, and not be open to another person's idea. Like, that information gets fed to you on your feed as soon as you open that platform. And then the other one is that the postmodern thinking encourages self-definition without moral anchors. Men are told to be whatever they feel like, but many feel lost and alone. As much as at an individual level, you need to define for yourself the kind of person that you are. But there still is a very important part of understanding that your definition of who you are has got to be mindful of the fact that you're part of a society. You're part of a life organism, of a life form. You know, in the ecosystem, think about it from biology, right? I'm come from the era where we did biology, not, was it the natural sciences? What's that? Life sciences. Yeah, biology, yes. And then we learned about the ecosystem. And the ecosystem is about understanding that within the ecosystem, which is a life organism, there are living organisms that feed each other life, right? The animal they eat the grass, and then the same grass, when they excrete it as feces, it becomes manure, which then gives back the same life from where the life they've taken. At the very same time as well, human beings, we eat meat, and then same thing applies, and blah blah blah. Like there's an exchange of life. That even when those leaves are falling into the ground, that becomes part of the germination into the ground, which then enriches the ground for the fruit to grow. So what that tells us is the fact that we are part of an ecosystem, and there is a codependency as much as there is a need for us to be independent. Our independence cannot be absolute and be detached from our codependency to each other as far as how we share the resources. And as I've mentioned, unfortunately, in the industrialization, we saw a greediness that came with that domination, where instead of sharing the resources, there was exploitation of resources. There was exploitation of other people's resources, whether it be actual minerals and that came from the ground, but also the resources in terms of the energy of those people, where they were used to enrich the leaders of industrialization at the expense of their own energy, their own mental health, their own psychological well-being, their availability to their families to raise their own families. And in the end, we end up having, these generations that have been traumatized by those areas. And I believe that that's where it actually went wrong. There's a very powerful verse in the Bible that says the following. I think it's 1 Corinthians 6, verse 12, that I am permitted to do anything. Like, I can do anything. I have the freedom to do anything as I want, especially as an adult. But not everything benefits me. Not everything is beneficial. And we cannot just be so buy into the idea of I can be whatever I want without understanding that whatever I want to be has to bear in mind the well-being of everybody else around me as well. So as much as there is an individual agenda for you as a human being, that individual agenda cannot be at the expense of the communal existence and the communal well-being of those who are around you. And the last one is feminism. While rightly empowering women, it has sometimes inadvertently left men without a clear sense of what strength, leadership, and or manhood looks like in the world. And I don't necessarily think so. I don't blame feminism at all. The reality of it is the following, is that because of these men in history that have been dominating women, rightfully so, women had to retaliate against that oppression, where they're not allowed to go to get educated, are not allowed to work. They were not allowed to have individual rights as human beings, and rightfully so. As it happens even with discrimination and with colonization and with oppression, when you are oppressed as a human being, there's a point where you have to retaliate, and rightfully so, women have retaliated, and rightfully so. In the workplace right now, for the most part, there is equal opportunity. And what that basically means is the following. Some of the values or some of the factors that used to give men their value, such as work, such as being the source of information, being intelligent, in other words. Like, there was this whole idea that men are more intelligent than women, but what we didn't realize was the following, is that because men were the only ones who were allowed to be educated, it appeared as though men were more intelligent than women, because they would be in that formal education system. But we know that as soon as women started coming into to get educated, what happened? All of a sudden, men are being shown flames. All of a sudden, women are smart. These girls are smart. These girls are smart. The more and more women came into this school, the more and more you see the rise of women in these positions of intelligence. I mean, I can think of it even back in the day when I was in school, but back in the 1990s, right? I've been around for quite a long time. I went to my grade 1 at 1987. Some of you are probably not even born back then in the room here. Back in those days, I mean, boys used to be like, we'd never allow women or the girls to beat us, and we'd occupy those positions. But as time progresses, that picture is changing, because we're realizing that intelligence is not a gender factor, but it is a human trait. It's a human trait. And intelligence is about how you use it more than your possession of it. It's about how you use it more than your possession of intelligence. Have you ever heard the expression that says that, the world is run by C graders hiring A graders, C performers hiring A performers? Because at the end of the day, it's not about your possession of the actual intelligence, but it is about how you use it. And because of this rise in feminism, men don't find themselves struggling to find their value in society. It used to be absolute in a sense that you'd go to work as a man, make the money, bring the money home, and then the woman will just raise the family and nurture and all of that. But now that a woman has got opportunity to go to work and these days make more money than you, what is your value as a man? Confusion, blank face, starry eyes. You don't know what to do. When it comes to intelligence, women are educated. More than that, they don't depend on you now as the sole source of information so you can feel all intelligent. As far as security and protection and all of that is concerned, Do you realize that women now can buy that protection? They can have work, live in their own estates with the high walls, with electrical fencing around it, and be protected without you needing to be there physically present to protect them. So they can provide that protection for themselves, financial protection for themselves, physical protection for themselves, emotional protection for themselves. Because these days, as opposed to talking to you and talking about their problems, they can go to a therapist, they can go to a psychologist, they can go to church and hear from a pastor. So a lot of men are confused as to, okay, now what is my role in your life now that you can be able to provide all of these for themselves? Which then brings us to the question of, then should we then redefine manhood for ourselves? And I believe that yes, we should. And I believe the starting point is, again, awareness. Like, how many of us as men are aware of these things I have shared in a more conscious way? Not in some idea out there in the background. How many of us have actually realized that we have to show up differently now as men? That our manhood cannot be solely dependent on these old ideas, which were based on factors such as industrialization and the wars that these power mongering and power hungry men used to go over, and all of these hierarchical oppressive systems that they had built, where men would be on the top of the hierarchy and everybody else, and they would be top of the hierarchy based on who can dominate, who can deceive, who can trick, who can whatever, into being mindful of society in general. And I think that's where for me the discussion is that whenever I'm having these discussions with a lot of us men, and whenever I see these comments online and these podcasts, is that there's a lamentation for the nostalgia, like for the past, what our fathers used to do and what our fathers used to be able to do. Like, our mothers respected our fathers more. But what we don't realize is that there's a skewed reality there. There's a skewed reality. It wasn't so much that our mothers respected our fathers more, but it was the fact that there was the setting. The mom stayed at home because she wasn't allowed to go and work. The father was allowed to go and work, and the roles were very clearly defined because those roles were regulated. It was a curated and a regulated societal environment. Because in oppressive society, that's what you do. You regulate and you control and you curate. But in a more equal society, the level of independence of every individual in society rises. And people have got more right to determine for themselves what is good for themselves, especially if it happens that whatever it is that is happening in society is harmful to them. If it is harming them, they have the right to change it. And with equalization and with the rise in consciousness and the need for us to be equal, the reality of it is that women have a right to self-determine. They've got a right to reject what does not serve them. But at the very same time as well, as responsible and accountable human beings as men, we also have to acknowledge and recognize that actually this change that has happened requires for us then to adjust our own identity. And to learn that I'm going to have to lead differently now. To learn that protection isn't so much necessarily that I've got to give physical protection, but is that part of it is that I also have to protect the psychological well-being of those around me. As opposed to be the one being the sole decision maker, part of your identity now in your role is that I have to now become a collaborator. And collaboration is about equality, that I'm collaborating with us here in the studio, right? It's a collaboration effort, that I'm not seated here as some kind of a superior person, because without your help, this doesn't happen. So it's a collaboration. Though there are different roles in a room, those roles, they may have a particular function and an order in which everything's going to be executed, but we're talking to each other as equals, regardless of the fact that I'm older than you, right? And that was part of the issues, especially with that oppressive system. Like, any advantage that you have, it can be a factor of oppression. That one of the challenges, for example, is the issue of generations, the generational differences. One of the works that I do with companies, I talk about that harmony and what is the biggest tension in the workplace. The biggest tension in the workplace is between the baby boomers and the Gen Zs. Why? Because of the complete contrast in terms of the upbringing, especially in terms of the understanding of power. Gen Zs are raised in a more equal society where they have the right to say, no, I don't want to eat. If I said, no, I don't want to eat, that would be the last time I ate that day, because it would be seen as a reflection of disrespect. And they grew up in a more equal society where they can make choices that older generation could not be able to make. Because in their generation, there are no wars. Well, right now the wars are happening in the world, but anyway. But by and large, in their teen, there were no wars. There was already an existing infrastructure where life is a lot easier than with the older generation. So the older generation looks at everything from the point of, everything has got to be hard. Everything has got to be, people have got to be very, very tough. But don't realize that the toughness and the hardness was more a time period issue, and the lack of development in the society, the lack of infrastructure, which required for you to operate in that level of toughness in that way, versus today where things are a lot more easier, and you got to operate more from the level of your humanity, the full realization of who you are, and the confidence that of what that is, than being regulated and being told what to do. And baby boomers have difficulty working with Gen Zs because Gen Zs can say no, and they can choose. They want to choose when to work. Where we come from, no way choosing when to work, right? They want to choose the careers that they want. They don't get told what to do, in a sense. And when they get into the workplace, they find these disparities with people that have been there for a long time, who are going to leverage age as a power, leverage tenure as a power, leverage seniority as a power, and then would use the majority, the advantage of them being the majority, especially in leadership, and try to have that be the culture, but not realizing that it doesn't cater for the younger generation who were raised in a completely different environment from how they were raised. And in trying to, and understanding that we have to then negotiate from the different generations, look at the strengths from different generations, and find how do you collaborate that, how do you complement that. And that is what needs to happen. And if I were to re-inject anything into the definition of a man, is that a man is a collaborator. Manhood has got to be injected with collaboration, with facilitation, with negotiation, with dialogue, with openness, with curiosity in terms of the change that is happening, so that in that curiosity we can be able to discover newness around what manhood is supposed to be today. What does leadership look like in terms of modern day manhood, masculinity, and all of those factors that are contributing to what a man is supposed to be. So it is not for me to tell you today what is manhood. My invitation to you is that let's have a dialogue. Let's have a discussion. Let's reserve the right to get rid of any ideas that are leading to the high levels of young men taking their own lives, men taking their own lives, men get involved in a lot of addictions. Betting is increasing online. Like a lot of men, because of that, they're really involved in betting. South Africa spent, I think, 1.2 trillion rands last year on betting, and 77% of those people are men. Pornography is increasing because, again, it's an escape. Men are escaping into this area of trying to get dopamine because they're struggling to navigate the complexity of the complex world that they're living in because of not knowing. What does it mean to be a man? What is now my role? What about this whole 50-50 thing? Should I provide or should I provide? Should I take her money? Should I not take her money? Should I steal? And the ultimate result of that is that there's a generation of very passive men who are pacified by just the complexity of just existing as a man. If we don't negotiate, if we don't discuss these things, if we don't talk about them, I'm afraid that things are going to get worse and worse. So what are your thoughts? What is manhood to you? What is your identity as a man? I can give you a whole bunch of lists, but I would have to assume some kind of authority over you. But I don't. You do. We do. Together. My name is Jabu Zwane. Thank you so much for tuning into the Men of Change podcast today. I hope the conversation was helpful to you. If you have any questions, please drop them down into the comment section. Remember to subscribe. Remember to share your comments. Remember to follow. And please continue to be the man of change. Lead the change that you want to see inside yourself and the one that you want to see in society. Thank you, Arise Studio. Thank you, team. Jaden, Yonda, and Amo. And of course, Eop. Thanks a lot, guys. Much appreciated. See you on the next episode.